Happy Monday, everybody. It's Dr. Karen. And today we are going to talk about how much time you should actually be spending working on your dissertation when you're in dissertation mode. Because I've had talked to a lot of people, and after just really assessing the situation of a lot of different graduate students who come from a lot of different walks of life. So some of them being full-time students, some of them being, full-time, or I wouldn't say full-time students, but students that also have full-time jobs, or students who have a full-time job and a family and maybe even a second job. From really seeing a lot of different situations, I've had the chance to see what works for people and what doesn't, and what tends to cause people to struggle or get stuck at a certain stage. And a lot of it comes down to the amount of time and commitment you're putting towards that dissertation. And so I know that seems terribly obvious, but a lot of times they'll say that they're committed to the process, but how that actually plays out in their lives and how that plays out for one person versus another person is totally different. And a lot of times we might be really committed to a goal and really want it, but then we're not actually sure how to actually make that come to fruition and really make that possible. So really, I wanted to talk about a general guideline that you can use to figure out if you're actually spending enough time, one, to be able to get it done in the amount of time that you have allotted based on where you are now and when your finish date is. And also just thinking about, okay, how long does it actually take you to really get in the zone and get into what some people refer to as a flow state. And that is really the state that you get into when you tend to lose yourself in the activity that you're in. And that is really where we do our best work. And so we want to consider how long it actually takes most people to get into that state, because a lot of times with some of the advice out there, they're saying, oh, just do a little bit at a time, just do it in little chunks of time and fit it in between your other daily activities. But we have to consider whether we're really giving ourselves enough time to get focused, and whether we are actually causing ourselves to lose momentum because maybe we're trying to block it into just a couple days. So I wanted to really go back to some of the advice out there that's being given. So a lot of times people will say, just sit down for a couple minutes and do something, or whether that be like 15 minutes or whether that be, just sit down for even 5 minutes. And the problem with just sitting down for that short period of time is that most of the time that does not work. Sure, if you just have to send a quick email and that's all you're going to do that day, then you might be okay. But chances are, in order to get to the finish line in your dissertation, trying to actually fit a decent amount of writing into 15-minute blocks is going to be really hard. So let's just put this into perspective for just a minute here and think about what this actually means, and what it actually means to have a finished dissertation, and what it actually means to have a doctoral degree, because that's what we're talking about here. So when you actually look at the amount of people who are able to finish their degrees, we're talking about 2% of the US population that actually has some type of doctoral degree that can rightfully call themselves, doctor or whatever, and be able to put that title in front of their names. So it's a huge honor. And so it should come as no surprise that just doing 5 minutes a day or 15 minutes a day or whatever, that in order to achieve something that prestigious, that few people have been able to achieve, if you think about the logic there, saying just do a little bit at a time, it really just doesn't make sense, because the people who are able to earn that title rightfully and be able to have that title in front of their name didn't do it by half-assing their way to the finish line. And they did it by putting a substantial amount of time towards that goal. Now, the challenge is that when you're doing anything like this, if you get to that point, so number one, we can't put too little time towards this, but if we put too much time, then we burn out, and then those people don't finish either because they burn the candle at both ends and they totally burn out before they get to the finish line. So we've got to find some type of happy medium. But I wanted to talk just a minute about why trying to cram this into those really, really short sessions often doesn't work for people, and why a lot of people who come to us for help, if they've tried that before, why they're struggling. And I like to use an analogy of running and working out, because really, when you think about flow state and optimal performance, it works kind of the same way. So since I'm a runner, I'll use a running example. So back, again, when I'm in peak training mode, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll do these track workouts with very specific intervals at specific paces for a portion of the workout. And so how this goes, how it actually plays out, is for about the first 15 minutes or so, I'm just doing an easy jog. So I'll run about 2 miles or so at least to get myself warmed up at a nice easy pace. And then I might do some other different drills and in order to get myself ready to go. And so that process takes about 15 to 20 minutes. Before that, a lot of times, even the first mile, I'm feeling kind of crappy. And, towards the second mile, things are starting to finally feel pretty good. Things are starting to get warmed up. But I'm not really even to my best where I'm able to run my fastest at that point, because I'm like, my body's still getting ready to go. I'm not quite in the zone yet. It takes me a good 20 to 25 minutes to get there. And so once I've gotten past that for 15-minute warm up or so, now this is where the actual workout begins. And this is where I actually will do some specific intervals at a target pace. So this is like the meat of the workout, where the real workout is. And then once I do that, once I'm done with my intervals, then I cool down for 10 to 15 minutes and then I go home. So the entire process, if I'm going to do one of those really meaty workouts during peak training, it can take like 60 to 90 minutes. And so when it's all said and done, there are some key pieces to that workout. And when you there's actually a lot of parallels between something like this and writing and dissertation level work, or really any big meaty assignment like that. So think back to what I said about this workout, is that in that first 15 minutes, I'm not even like, the real work hasn't even begun. The core workout didn't actually happen until after that initial stage. And so if I would have just gone every day and just run 15 minutes and then left, I wouldn't have even gotten to that real workout. So yeah, I would have maintained some level of fitness and I would have kind of maintained the status quo, but I never would have pushed myself beyond to that next level where I was really pushing myself towards a higher goal and towards a higher standard. And without doing that and without getting through those stages, I really wouldn't have been able to work towards any specific race pace goal. And the dissertation is the same way. This is something that is above and beyond where you currently are. So you do have to get to the point where you are pushing yourself a little bit and getting yourself to sit there longer than might feel comfortable. And I mean, even for a lot of people, even that first 15 minutes might not feel very comfortable because you are still getting warmed up and still kind of getting in the zone. So really it works the same way for writing. So let's consider another scenario. Let's say that if I were to say, you know what, like, I know that this warm up and just kind of doing this easy pace isn't really going to get me anywhere. So I'm just going to go full throttle for 15 minutes and just say, screw this warm up. I don't need to do this. And let's say that I did that. So what would have happened is that I essentially would have burnt myself out and injured myself because I would have tried to go full throttle without really warming up. And So a lot of times what people will realize when they've been doing the 15 minutes per week thing is they realize that they're kind of like coming in and leaving after the warm up, so to speak, as I said before. And so what they do is that instead of trying to ease into it and really get into a good flow, what they'll do is that they'll sit down and they'll be like, I've got 15 minutes, I've got to go. And they'll just try to force themselves into it. And they almost get themselves into a panic or fight or flight mode. So because they realize they haven't been getting a lot done, they kind of start freaking out. So they're still trying to figure out how to cram it into these little time blocks. And then instead of actually getting anything done, they're getting themselves into this panic mode. And what that does is it impairs your decision making because you've got all this cortisol dumping into your system. And then you might get some writing done, but a lot of times it's kind of crappy and you're doing something that's damaging to your health. So what's kind of ironic about trying to do that is if you're trying to push yourself to just go and cram your dissertation into these tiny blocks of time, is that you really end up causing yourself more stress, which is kind of ironic because a lot of times when people say something like, oh, just write for 15 minutes at a time or whatever, what they're doing is they're trying to make it less overwhelming to you. But a lot of times people fall in either camp where they're just kind of like warming up and leaving and not really getting anything done. Or maybe they're getting something done, but it's so forced and they're so panicked because they're rushing through it that it's not good quality work and they're actually stressing themselves out more. So it's kind of ironic because a lot of times people tell you that to stress you out less, but it actually can cause more stress because you're getting into panic mode. And then it also causes more stress because a lot of times you're not getting what you want done and the draft that you're coming up with isn't your best work. And so that causes a lot of stress because it just drags the process out even further. So really what you need, and I am convinced that is not a coincidence that like for that peak training mode, for a good solid workout, a lot of times you need that 60 to 90 minutes. And the same thing goes for writing your dissertation. So really to go back to that question of how much time do you really need when you're in peak writing mode? This doesn't mean this has to be the entire time that you're doing your dissertation, because I know there's some times when you are collecting data or waiting to get drafts back and things like that. But really, when you're in that peak writing mode, in order to get that momentum, in order to keep you in that flow, and in order to make sure that you're able to get yourself into that zone, you really do need to be spending between 1 to 2 hours a day. Now, could you break that up into a couple chunks of time? Of course, but we don't want to make them too small because then you have that problem of, having to force yourself into almost a panic state to get anything done because you feel rushed, or you get to the point where you're just trying to ease in and you realize that 15 minutes has gone by and you haven't done anything. So really, what we recommend to people who are coming in to work with us in our premium level program for people who are working on a dissertation is that we recommend that you are blocking out at least 1 to 2 hours a day. And ideally, if you have maybe 1 or 2 hours or 1 or 2 days a week that you can block out a little more time, that's an extra bonus. So a lot of times people, what they'll do is if they've got a full-time schedule, what they'll do is they might try to do 1 hour in the morning, 1 hour in the evening during the week. And then what they'll do is that they might block out a 3 to 4 hour time block sometime on the weekend. Or, if they'll get really creative where they might, use vacation time on certain days during peak writing time, or even maybe just have one night during the week where they spend a longer time doing their writing, and maybe the other days they only spend like an hour or something like that. But really, that is the minimum amount of time that's required when you're really in one of those pushes when you're trying to get a draft done. Because what happens is that when you try to be a weekend warrior and just cram it all into the weekend, or try to just cram it into a couple days, or even try to do it in those mini time blocks is that you don't end up getting enough done. And the problem with doing it just, 1 to 2 times a week is that you do lose momentum. You spend that first hour trying to figure out where you left off, and you just end up wasting a lot of time. So it's really key, and that's actually something that we require of people before we even give them the option to come in to our program, is that one of the criteria that we have is that people need to be able to devote at least that much time every day to writing their dissertation when they are in that draft writing mode. And we do that because we want the people that we work with to get amazing results. And we know that if there's not a commitment of enough time, that we know that they're not likely to meet their goal. So it's really, really a two-way street there, with really having to put that amount of commitment forward. But notice that, again, I said 1 to 2 hours a day. I didn't say you've got to be pulling all-nighters. So there really is a balance there between making it a priority and making sure that you're sleeping, making sure that you're spending time with your family, making sure that you're, exercising and eating right. So what we have found is that tends to be the right balance of giving yourself enough commitment that you're getting it done, but also not so much that you're completely burning yourself out. Because if you go in the other direction, and you are burning the candle at both ends and staying up all night, then you are going to wear yourself out really fast. And that's what a lot of times people who will come to us, because they've tended to do those all-nighters, maybe at the end of the semester with finals and drafts. And while you can do that for something that is a one-time paper for a class that tends to be a lot shorter, you really can't do that with the dissertation. You've really got to learn how to pace yourself in order to get to the finish line. So that is really the answer to the question of today, that you want to be blocking out that 1 to 2 hours a day. And if you have a couple times a week that you can do a little bit more, that is a very good balance for you to actually be able to finish this, especially if you have a full-time job and a family and you've got to get creative with your time. So I will leave you with that. But before I wrap up today, obviously, figuring out how much time is just part of the challenge when you are writing a dissertation. In addition to that, you have to figure out, again, it's not just about how much time, it's what you do with that time. So the first step is figuring out how much time and when you're going to block it out. But then the second step is figuring out, based on when your timeline is, what specific actions do you need to be taking during those 1 to 2 hours a day in order to ensure that it's actually going to lead to your end goal. So that is where we come in, and that is why people work with us, because we help them break down that massive project and help them get into a flow state every time that they're sitting down to work, and really help them map out their entire process so that they are taking intelligent action every time they block out an hour or two to work on their dissertation. Because nothing is worse than blocking out an hour to get something done and realizing the hour is up and you've accomplished nothing. And what's even worse than that is realizing that that's been going on for a month or a couple months or a year when you could have, or even a couple years, and realizing that you've let that time get away from you and you could have been making progress and you could have been reaping the benefits of having that degree. So if you are struggling to get through the dissertation at any point in the process, so whether you are right at the beginning of your proposal, just working on your first couple chapters, or whether you have somehow gotten through that point, but it's been like pulling teeth the entire time and you've just gotten stuck somewhere in the process. So maybe you have all of your data and you're ready to write your results section, but you're just having a really hard time putting it together and figuring out how to get to that next step. That is exactly where we support people and how we support people to get to the finish line. So if you're at any point in the process and you're struggling, we would love to take some time to chat with you and see if we can support you. So on this call, I'm going to just share the link in the chat in just a minute here. So again, on this 45 to 60-minute call, what we do is we take a look at your situation and exactly where you are in the process. And we also dive in to why this is a huge problem for you and exactly where you're getting stuck. And if it makes sense for us to work together beyond that, and if we are the best solution to help close that gap, then we can talk about that. But if not, we can make some recommendations for you to help you get to the next level. But really the goal is to get you massive clarity on exactly what's keeping you from getting to the finish line, finishing that dissertation, and becoming a doctor. So if you would like to schedule a call with us, if you're struggling at any point in the process, go ahead and click on that scheduling link in the comments, and you'll be taken to a scheduling page where you can pick a time, and then you'll be sent to another page where you'll fill out an application for us so that we can best serve you on the call. So with that, go ahead and click that link to schedule a call, and thank you so much for listening this afternoon.